Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 246, Don't Sleep on Filipino Choral Music, with Reagan Paras. Choirs across the Western world are making huge strides as we push for more diverse repertoire, as well as approaches to vocalization and instruction. Reagan Paras urges us to include the Philippines as a rich resource in this effort. In this conversation, Reagan shares his unique perspective on Filipino choral music and its cultural significance. He discusses his journey from the Philippines to the United States, the challenges of cultural identity, and the importance of diverse repertoire, and for methods in music education. Reagan emphasizes the complexity of Filipino music, its indigenous roots, and the needs for cultural recognition in various pedagogies. He also provides resources for us to access Filipino music, highlighting the promising future of this genre in the global music landscape. In this conversation, Reagan discusses the vibrant choral music scene in the Philippines, emphasizing the unique vocal qualities and cultural significance of singing in Filipino society. He explores the challenges faced by composers and performers, the importance of embracing the full range of the human voice, and the need for effective communication in music education. The discussion also addresses the social dynamics surrounding male participation in the choirs, the contrast to the Philippines versus the United States, for example, and the crisis of male singers in our choral world, including some strategies towards the end of engaging those young male singers in your choral programs. So tune in and stick around all the way to the end, even if you have to listen in spurts. It's the beautiful thing about a podcast. And you can then weigh in or ask questions or offer your thoughts over at the Choralosopher's Facebook page, or read more material about the episodes and the conversations, or simply leave comments on the Substack at choralosophy.substack.com. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber to this show. That's not required, but if you want me to keep doing it forever, I'm going to have those people subscribed. You can start at $3 a month, all the way up to $20 a month. And on Patreon, there's a list of different levels with different perks, so to speak. Or on Substack, you can simply upgrade your free subscription there to a paid subscription. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Venture Studios, Brian Long, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, and Steve and Kathy Kokacek. Okay, everybody, I'm here with Reagan Paras. Reagan is a choir director out on the East Coast, and we're going to learn more about him a little bit in a second, but I have to start with this story. I bumped into Reagan at ACDA National in the lobby going into the concert hall, and got to meet in person, and just had like an instant idea of like, okay, so we've got to do a podcast on the Philippine choral perspective, because that is something, Reagan, you pointed out that I had not done that. And that is absolutely true. I have not done that. So this is a first. Welcome, Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I have to say, you are one of the first to actually give us a platform to speak about our music. So I appreciate you being progressive and thinking about how we can broaden what we offer in music education.
Yeah, and I do feel terrible that I hadn't thought of it before, because there's actually a pretty decent size audience for choralosophy in the Philippines. I get my little stats on my podcast. Now, of course, I'm sure even more people over there will tune in now that I've done this episode. So that's a good thing. So Reagan, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you, other than just you're a choir director on the East Coast? Tell us a little bit more of that story.
Thank you. So I was born in the Philippines. I came here when I was young. I immigrated to the United States, and I just interestingly enough, my last name is Paras, like you said correctly. And I didn't typically look like you're Eastern Asian, right? So you're Chinese, you're Korean or Japanese. And so my brothers and I were often just misrepresented, and we ended up going into a Spanish speaking classroom a few times because they thought Paras, he lives in San Diego, he must be Mexican. But that was quickly cleared up. And so I've kind of lived in this weird identity space of like, what am I? Am I Asian? Am I Pacific Islander? Which is actually common for a lot of Filipinos. But my stepdad is in the military, so we ended up moving all over the United States. So I lived in Alaska, I lived in Oregon, and settled in Massachusetts. I was a high school teacher for 9 years, almost 10 years, and I loved it. And I almost stayed in the world of high school and junior high music, but an opportunity fell into my lap. I ended up teaching at a small undergraduate Catholic institution. I think they hired me because they assumed I was Filipino, meaning that I must be Catholic, but I was not Catholic. So I think within 2 weeks of being hired, I had to conduct a Catholic mass. So it was baptism by fire for sure. And then I've been blessed to have been hired as associate professor at Berklee College of Music, and I'm finishing my doctorate by May of 2026. But I'd be remiss to say that I'm also a husband and father of 3 kids.
Awesome. That's very cool. That's very cool. Being a dad is my favorite part of all the things
Yeah.
that I get to do.
I often say like we have to prioritize, right? What is our priority? Faith, family, and then work. But we certainly sacrifice 1 and 2 for 3.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I often tell people that I feel pretty good about my ability to do my jobs, but there are a few things that I will brag about, and I will brag about. I'm a good dad. I am really good dad. I pour everything into my kids, and I think they would even tell people that I'm a good dad, and that's how you know. That's how you know. So that's the thing I'm most proud of anything. And if I can ask, since we're doing personal
Sure.
things off of that, how old are your kids?
So I have a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So the two oldest are boys, and my little girl, 6 years old. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about what you do about what your job's like at Berklee.
Yeah. So I'm in the music education department. We have, in fact, our department head, Cecil Adderley, was just recently, he's president-elect of NAFME National. So it's exciting. And I work with the music education students and non-music ed majors, and I conduct one of the concert choirs that we have. I teach choral rehearsal techniques, survey of choral literature. I have a advanced conducting course I teach with master students. And so even though our certification is certainly wide, instrumental and choral, and I had to conduct a lot of instrumental music, I'm primarily in the choral world, and introduction to music education as well.
Okay, that's exciting. Very cool.
It's great.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. So, Reagan, in the Philippines, let's just jump in there first. What are before we even get to the repertoire? What are things that you would want American or even just choir directors around the world in different places that might not have firsthand knowledge of Filipino culture? What do we need to know about Philippine choral music? Are there interesting things about the culture there that might make their relationship with choral music unique and noteworthy?
Yeah, it's so interesting that it's hard to start because there's really an academic invisibility with our music and our perspective, right? So outside of the archipelago, you don't hear a lot of Filipino choral music being performed. But if you are from the Asian countries, you know that Filipinos have just kick butt choirs, right? Like these kick ass choirs that tend to win all of these awards. And it's really because the music is quite virtuosic. So for the untrained or just if you haven't heard choral music from the Philippines, it sounds extraordinarily complex. And that really is because of the complex rhythms that we have. And oftentimes our melodies you don't hear. So in Filipino choral music, you're focusing more on texture rather than melody, which is kind of refreshing and exciting, right? Like, and it's really quite wonderful. And I want to talk to a little bit too. Why is it? Why is our music not being performed? But I mean, I'm curious to know your perspective. But have you ever learned about any choral tradition during your undergraduate or graduate studies from the Philippines?
So I would say during undergraduate, no. Now I forgive my possible ignorance here, but is Alejandro Consolacion, is he Filipino? Do you
I'm
know that
not
composer?
sure. I'm not sure.
Okay, so then I think he is. There's a composer that I came across early on, like in the early days of Facebook. I came across his music, and I'm pretty sure he's a church organist over there and a choral composer. And so no one taught me about any Filipino composers. I just kind of found one as the internet became a thing. And I've done with my pro choir, I've done several of his pieces, and then I've done a couple with my high school kids uh, so it was like a Christmas piece, and I'm going to also be ignorant here because it's been so many years. It was like it's like a local Filipino Christmas carol, and it was arranged for choirs, and that's the extent of my Filipino choral music knowledge.
Well, it's more than what most people are doing, right? There's certainly an invisibility in Filipino cultural identity outside of music education, and it's certainly impacted people's perception or really understanding of this music. And it's just there's a lot of limited access to that music. So I what I've done too at Berkeley is even in my intro to music education courses, I've started to introduce some folk music from the Philippines, and it's really quite it's been exciting for me to see the students kind of just really step up and embrace a lot of that culture and a lot of that music. And I have to tell you, every time I conduct a festival, it's quite amazing. I always can bet on one or two or several students come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm Filipino. I'm also Filipino." And
Mm.
I never got that. I never got that chance to be a student, to look up to see someone like, oh my gosh, they look like me, or they might understand a lot of what I'm doing. And I think there's a lot of a reason for that too. I think our invisibility is true because a lot of Filipinos, and it's based on research, extensive research, right? We hold on to a lot of our colonial mentality that we've had because we have been colonized by first Spain and then the U.S. and then we were, it was pretty brutal that when the Japanese just took over the Philippines. But I've noticed that other Asian traditions hold on to their culture a little bit more than Filipinos do, including the passing on of language, which initially my mom was speaking to me in Tagalog, our national language, and then when she shifted away from that because for a variety of reasons. Big one is they wanted us to be more competitive, right? More competitive on the world stage, business wise, or get into a better school. So imagine the disappointment when I told my mom I wanted to go for music education and not be a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer.
Yeah, that's interesting because um, I hear that perspective that you just voiced there from a lot of folks that I talk to on the podcast and off the podcast, but from a variety of cultures around the world, especially in cultures that have had kind of either a colonial past, and so now they are trying to develop their economy kind of I would say late to the game of developing their economy for obvious reasons because the economy gets kind of shredded, and then 100 years later you're trying to build yourself back up, and then there's this attitude of like, well, we can't do music because we've got to work hard and do real jobs, which of course American kids deal with that too here, but it's just in a different way and to a different extent. There's a privilege here in the US where many parents can afford to let their kids do the arts and not have to pay their bills, that kind of stuff. It's a different.
Yeah, I see a lot of the idea of being a music educator or in the education profession. Initially, it's kind of shocking, right? Like if you're not going to be in the medical field, and particularly there's a lot of Filipino nurses, and we're known for being very empathic and very kind, but just that outside looking in, thinking like that's a low quality profession, and I gotta tell you, it's been a 180 with my mom when she saw me kind of flourish and blossom. And I've got to tell you, we've got to change the narrative that music educators it's a poor profession because I have, like I said, three kids. We've gone through how many economic catastrophes, and I've been able to provide very well. I'm not starving. I've been able to provide very well for my family, and it's been a blessing. But it's the profession of education is really a secure one, and so I think when my mom recognized that there's a lot of places to go, it's really quite wonderful. But yeah, I digress. I always jump into it. I love what we do. I love making music with people, and I want to share that. And I am concerned about the teacher shortages that we're seeing. But I do think that by broadening repertoire, I think people are realizing that there's so much excitement behind music. I think that we're sitting on the precipice of something really quite wonderful. We just as a profession have to keep going hard, because if we can just get that momentum back, I think what we can offer in the public schools is going to be really incredible.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that a lot of the teacher shortage issue is going to continue to be the case. Of course, that would be a completely different podcast. I'll have to have you come back and
Sure.
just do a podcast about that. But it's going to continue to be the case until certain attitudes about what school is for start to get worked out in our culture and our society. I had a conversation with my tenor bass choir today, mostly ninth grade boys. Like, guys, I want to have fun too, but we're not here to have fun. You understand that, right? Like, we can be having fun, even though the reason to be here is not fun. The reason to be here is, and of course I make them fill in the blank, like, to learn. Okay, yeah, like that is why you're here. And I think a lot of times teachers, we are in a customer service mode right now. Like that's a very difficult place to be.
Yeah, it's scary actually. It's scary.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of teachers are carrying the wrong perception, right? So here I am in my story. I'm kind of reclaiming back my Filipino heritage and just realizing musically we can do something incredible. And this is my terrible segue, right? Like I totally talked about our colonial history a little bit from Spain and America, but in reality is when you think of Filipinos, we're really good at karaoke. We're really good at being musical mannequins, and we've oftentimes like not embraced or championed our music. But there's two things that you need to know, like in terms of Filipino music, right? We have the indigenous Filipino music, that's music that has not received any outside influence. And then you have the folk Filipino music, the genre of folk music, and that is kind of like this collaboration, this beautiful like marriage of different cultures. So we have a lot of like Spanish folk music, American folk music, and then we also have choral music from that we would call indigenous from regions of the Philippines, and it's really unique. If you notice, like the Philippines, for instance, right? Before our colonization, we had our own alphabet system. We had our own counting system. So our alphabet system was abacada, and it's syllabic based. And so when we were conquered by the Philippines, the phonetic F, like in Philippines or in Philip, right? That does not exist in abacada, but it was given to us by King Philip II of Spain after conquering the Philippines. And so you can kind of see this influence of outside colonizers into our music right away. In fact, it's famous in the Philippines. If you look at the Philippines and the southern region of it, Mindanao is a region. It's a region in the Philippines, and when they were not conquered by the Spanish right away, because maybe they didn't think like it was a worthy place, right? The Philippine archipelago is so vast. And so that was the Muslim region of the Philippines. And I said earlier, Catholicism is a big thing in the Philippines because the Spanish brought Catholicism to Spain, or sorry, to the Philippines rather. And so that region, they tend to hold their music a lot longer. So there's a composition by Nilo Alcala, and the way he did it was he took music from that region and it inspired his writing. So onomatopoeia is a term that means that it's words that represent sound. So like in basketball, swish, right? So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, like swish, or the old Batman and Robin, like pow, kapow, all of that. So all of these sounds are mimicking percussive instruments and using like a compositional term. It's the rhythmic stratification. It's this layering of these melodic ostinati on top of each other. So when you do it like 8 or 9 parts all at once, it sounds extraordinarily complex. But it's an ostinati, it's a repeating pattern. So for those of us who listen to this music and are like, oh my God, there is no way my choir can perform that, it's just try it, right? Like if you can get a group of, if your group of singers can go ahead and like lock into a melodic ostinati, and then you can layer on top of that. It's that music is really accessible to all of. I think it's accessible to high schools who have a good teacher and who are willing to who are willing to work with choirs that to expand their tonal memory.
The Choralosophy discount code can be used at mymusicfolders.com. This is a great place for you to get the choir folders that your program needs. You can also get robes at mychoirrobes.com, which is an affiliated company, and the checkout code works there as well. But it's not just folders and robes. You can get all types of choir-related equipment at mymusicfolders.com and get a discount when you enter the code. Now, is that feature of Filipino choral music, does that have its roots in the indigenous music, or is that just a trend that the composers passed around there?
It has its roots in indigenous music. So in the Philippines too, like there are two institutions where you hear a lot of choral music coming from, right? University of Santo Tomas and University of the Philippines, right? And so those are the two major institutions where they are creating all of this music. In fact, University of the Philippines, I'm sure you've heard of the Madrigal Singers or the Mads. If you haven't, go check them out. The Philippine Madrigal Singers. They are like world renowned. They're absolutely incredible, and they really come out of that University of the Philippines. And so I have to be careful with my Filipino friends who are from Santo Tomas, right? They might get offended that if I say this, but Nilo Akala, who I mentioned earlier, who's a lovely human being. What they do is the composition department and the choral department works directly with their ethnomusicologists there who are looking to preserve this music. And it's really quite scary. So about how quickly music can disappear, right? So like this idea of preserving the music of the Philippines is a real one that's happening. And I know I mentioned earlier, like we're an archipelago, right? With over 7,000 islands, but for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, you had mountains and bodies of water separating all of these people. And so what's happened is like they have their own unique music on these separate islands that no one have heard before, and they're still being discovered today. And it's just such an exciting time to be a Filipino composer and a Filipino choral teacher. One thing too, for all of your listeners, if you look at the population trends in the United States, right, we're becoming more racially diverse. But in particular, I think when people think of Asian, they have that generic Asian, right? Like they put us into this category of Asian, but the tremendous cultural differences between our Asian cultures, it's massive, right? You would not, I'm not Chinese, but you would not, I wouldn't say like Chinese is part of my culture, even though there's a lot of Chinese influence or Japanese or Korean. So like it's important that we begin to recognize the incredible diversity of the Asian minority group. If you look to population trends as well, right, like the number one sub-Asian group in America is Chinese American. Second is Indian American, but third is Filipino Americans, and it's only rising. So by 2055, we're going to have a significant increase of Asian representation in the United States. And if you take a look at the trends between 2000 and 2019, we were the largest minority group to increase, Asians as a whole. So your classrooms are going to continue to diversify, and it's important to start recognizing that the Asian students, they have a strong tradition that we need to begin to observe. And we have some wonderful composers who are trying to share our music.
That's awesome. And of course, one of my big pet peeves, it does get me in trouble, but it's the way we, ironically, in the United States, the way we de-diversify, I don't know if that's not a word. We remove the diversity of people, ironically, in conversations where we're trying to talk about how great diversity is. And one of those ways is the way you just hinted at, which is there's a famous expression about this, actually, that there are no Asians in Asia. There's an expression. It was like an author who writes on the continent. I saw it quoted recently in the Huffington Post, and of course, the expression "there are no Asians in Asia" just simply means like if you're over there, people don't think, "Oh, I'm Asian." They think I'm Filipino or I'm Han Chinese or I'm Japanese. But when they come to the United States, they all get lumped into this big pool that we call Asians, but really, of course, then that we're ignoring how diverse the continent really is.
Yeah. So that's a huge misrecognition by people. So I love that, like de-diversifying. That's like a double negative, right? It's like it's gonna work against exactly what we're trying to do. And pardon my dog, the bark. So, but yeah. So I hold on. I have
my dog makes appearances too.
yeah. I do have a hard time. I have a hard time with how people perceive an issue and then try to create all of these solutions, but in doing so, they've further, I guess, minimized what they're trying to do. So, for instance, the idea of representing, an Asian perspective, right? Like if you did one song, like popular song, Tracy Wong did it. It's so great. Is Wabulan, right? That's really quite beautiful. It's a great piece, but a lot of time people are like, okay, that's it. Like, but the Malaysian culture is completely different than the Japanese. It's completely different than the Filipino culture. So I think calling it is as it is, I think is really important. I could put my dog in the other room too, so if that's easier.
If that's easy for you to do, yeah, I can just cut this transition out, and if that'll make you less distracted, that's great.
Yeah, does it get? Are you catching the dog barking quite a bit? Or
yes, I'm getting the barking. Yeah.
All right. I'll move him around.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
You're fine. So
I wore the shirt, Berkeley.
That's great. That's great. So it sounds like what you're saying, and of course I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like what you're saying is that in this effort to make sure that American choirs or Western, I'm going to just say Western choirs, are improving our attempt at diversity, which is a good thing and is a laudable goal, that if we're not careful with how we categorize that diversity, we could do one song from Asia and then say, well, we did the Asian thing. We're good to go. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's a checkbox, right? So like I talk with a lot of my colleagues, and one thing that we talk about culturally responsive teaching, I think, is it's a powerful. It can be used as a powerful tool, but so many people have misinterpreted it, where they think just by including repertoire, that's it. But right, like how are we actually teaching that music like authentically the way they did? So a lot of my research and a lot of the work that I did, and I have to say this to be clear, right? Even though I was born in the Philippines, I'm pretty Americanized. I came here, and there was just not a lot of Philippine culture that I was exposed to, and so this is my reclamation of my heritage. But what a lot of my research was I actually reached out to composers and conductors in the Philippines, and I asked them, how do you perform this piece, right? What do you do in the Philippines that we can learn from? And I think that's like at the core, right? It's not just selecting repertoire and clicking a box and then contributing to that whole generic Asian perspective, right? You want to make sure that you're doing it in a manner that lifts up and enhances the choir. So in the Philippines, a lot of the music is unaccompanied, and the big reason behind that is, unlike the United States, where we have a lot of luxury, or even just Western, right? Even in Europe, you have venues that will have a reliable keyboard or organ that they could rely on. Not so much in the Philippines. So when you have a traveling choir, you have your voices. So often our music is unaccompanied, which is why I think a lot of people are scared. They're scared of the choirs losing their tonal center. And that just comes with good teaching, right? Like being exposed to it. Yep. And then, oh yeah, go ahead if you have.
No, I was just agreeing.
Yeah. And then in addition to like the rhythmic part of it, right? Like in the Philippines, a lot of choirs will use fixed do, right? And I don't want to get into that debate, but good Lord, I think fixed do is so tricky, right? I've tried to do both. Yeah, I think it's absolutely tricky. But if you are going to authentically rehearse your choir the way they do in the Philippines, oftentimes it's starting with the text and the rhythmic elements first. If you try to layer in melody first, your choir is going to fall flat. It's kind of like the same thing of, oh gosh, I'm going to give you a really poor example of teaching. When I think I was a third year teacher, I thought the best way to teach choirs was to apply solfege to every single piece of music, regardless of genre. And I think I did one. It was Cambodian. And I ended up having them do it on solfege. It was a disaster. It was the worst performance I had because that's not how they teach their music. So in the Philippines, if you're going to work on Filipino choral music, I would break down the text first and put it in a manner where you're saying it in time. And then I would actually add dynamics into it. So for instance, like there's a lot of like the juxtaposition between loud and soft is very prevalent in the Philippine music, in the choral tradition. So often when I do workshops with it, I take a piece and we speak through it, and we're not even looking at melody, and we just go through all the dynamics. And every single time I've done these presentations, their soft is not really soft, and their loud is not really loud. And you've got to think too, like if you're playing on a percussive instrument, right? Like a fortissimo is gonna go loud, but if it goes right to subito pianissimo, it's like boom. Right? And we're just not used to that change. And then once your choir is able to speak in time, add the melody, and it's going to be magic. I'm telling you, like when I say that this choral perspective is underperformed, I think once it finally kicks into gear, it's going to be something that people are going to program for every choir that they have, because it's just that impressive.
So what would be, and because I'm hoping to help spread the word here, because I want to get involved in more of it as well, and I want to learn more about that. So I'm sure there are other people who are listening and thinking that. So where would you recommend to go in terms of resources, publishers maybe that we can access here as American choral directors, or in the Western Hemisphere, so to speak? Where do we find this music?
So there is a website called MusicSea. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but MusicSea. Oh, okay, great. MusicSea is a wonderful website.
I can put a link in the show notes too.
Okay, perfect. Great. Yeah, please do that. And what it does is it's already done a vetting system where they take music of the Asian perspective and they arrange it based on different countries. And then you can also, I think a lot of people are complaining about the JW Pepper, like now, like with the upgrades of it. MusicSea is very easy to navigate. And in it, like if you just put in Filipino or Philippines, it automatically organizes it and it makes it absolutely clear. The one thing about it that some people might struggle with is, it's all web-based. So like you will be purchasing like a minimum of 25 copies, and then you get the PDF for it, right? So it's like the e-print that we have here. Mm-hmm. They're not one to like manufacture the paper and then to send it to you. Like that just doesn't exist, at least not yet. You could do, if you're in a more traditional, there are some music from J.W. Pepper. I think George Hernandez has he's a composer, has some really great stuff there too as well. The one thing, if you're working with younger choirs, Maria Teresa Roldan or Jude Roldan, they're like a husband and wife pair. They do really great stuff as well. It is accompanied for your younger choirs, which you should hear if you look like Filipino Roldan, Roldan on YouTube, you will hear their youth choir sing, and they're quite spectacular. They're really quite wonderful. So there's that strong tradition of choral music. But right now, like I highly suggest reaching out to even the composers that you see, even on MusicSea. They love working with American teachers and conductors. And one thing about Filipinos is we're overly nice. So like I've asked some of my composer friends in the Philippines, like, can you send me some of your music? And they're like, oh yeah, please. And don't pay for it. I'm like, no, you got to think like an American, and you've got to put a price tag on a lot of this music. It's really great music. I think it's just the Philippine people are just so kind, and they want to see their music performed. But yeah, it's great. It's really quite wonderful.
Now, this is just a random question that popped into my head related to that. Since you said of trying to convince them to, no, please go ahead and sell your music, like we would like to support you, etc. How common would you say it is in the Philippines for people who are choral musicians, whether they consider themselves amateur or professional, to make their living doing choral music? Is that like a thing that happens over there a lot, or is it not very common?
I wouldn't say it's common. I think there is a lot of, even though there's a strong singing culture. So like we jokingly say, right, like our karaoke becomes like the American Idol, the Philippine Idol, right? It's just like there's so much good singing going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of my composer friends say they do struggle with it. So you might have some benefactors that would pay for some of your work. And I think I had to learn, even though I would say I was raised in the United States, like I had to learn to be more assertive. I think that's a very Western approach. And it's an uncomfortable thing to say, buy my stuff, right? Like I'm not a good salesman. I'll tell you that. Like I'm not a great salesman. I'm passionate about what I do. So it's you'll often see a lot of composers in the Philippines. They'll have a church job. They'll try their best to supplement their funding in other ways outside of music. Um, I will say though, those who are composing, they are traveling. They're trying to share their music like via traveling, and they find ways to travel outside of the Philippines. There's that there's like ideas of trying to gain notoriety at like World Choir Games too. So there's a lot of competing choirs that will travel internationally to try to get some type of international fame that hopefully would give them more of a visibility, so people would pay for them.
Yeah, yeah. And I've seen quite a bit of the madrigal singers, the Philippine madrigal singers that you mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually want to get your take on my observations of them too, because of course it's famously true that choirs from different places around the world sound different. That's not a weird thing. So it's like you can tell that you're listening to like a Swedish radio choir kind of sound versus that you're hearing an American Midwest Lutheran College kind of sound versus, a British sound. These are all, this is normal. But what I notice about the sound of that group and a few others that I've heard from the Philippines is that it's a very robust, full-bodied singing, lots of vibrato, and the men of the choir in particular, like this is a show that kids do listen to, but not only kids. So I'm just going to say what my voice teacher used to say: balls to the wall. I want you to sing it balls to the wall. And so like there seems to be a lot of that, and not to say that there's no piano or no soft dynamic or anything like that, but that's always the first thing I notice. Am I weird to notice that, number one? And number two, where does that come from?
I love that you said that. Okay, so one of the things that I really struggle when I work with choirs or I have to adjudicate, right, is they approach each song with the same timbre of voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our voices are the most complex instrument in the universe. Our voice is
Yes.
so powerful. And so oftentimes, and I remember I was such a crazy kid, right? And this is not to disparage. I love the English perspective. I just adore it, right? I just conducted the John Rutter Requiem. I love their sound. And I remember as a young singer and a young conductor, I like paid my way to go to England to learn about what they were doing. And then I was like, oh, like, even though I could hear it, I'm like, they really are staying in one register, right? Like, and they have that soft, that plain chant song, which is perfect for that style, but it's only a part of what the voice can do. And
Mm-hmm.
so when
Yep.
a lot of choir teachers are working with their ensembles, they tend to take one perspective and they think it should filtrate to all their genres. But in the Philippines, we embrace what the human voice is capable of. So you might be able to, I mean, and not to say that we don't sing plain chants or we don't do that beautifully. We do, but we'll actually often layer what we do in our song in one song, like this very uniform sound, while whoever has the melody does that quote balls to the wall type of sound where they have that full bodied vibrato into it. And I think that's really important to start teaching young singers. And oftentimes too, like if you're telling them to, I think I message you too, like to blend your voice I see a lot of choirs under singing, and even at ACDA National, they're under singing. And what it's doing is like they're manipulating their voices in a deleterious way. Like they're going to injure their voice and at least not showcase what the voice is allowed to do. forever stunting them from improving. And that's what I love about the Philippine choirs is like they embrace the human voice, but all facets of it. So I'm sure in the songs that you were listening to, they have this full-bodied sound, but underneath it, they have a more poised sound, right? Like they're keeping the focus on who is having the melody. And so what I say to people who are approaching is like you really need to know how to use the human voice to its full capacity. Otherwise, right, like you're kind of heading into like a boxing match with one arm tied behind your back. Same thing with choral music in the Philippines. Like you got to learn to sing with your solo voices, but also sing as a more traditional choir, all in one song.
Yeah, that's really good. And of course, I don't have a background in Filipino cultural choral singing, but my philosophy is similar to what it sounds like yours is in terms of this. And like I know one of the things that adjudicators, probably my most common criticism that my choirs get from adjudicators, and of course, like lots of comments we get from adjudicators, we take what we can use and ignore the other part. But I get a lot of your kids are over singing, and I read that sometimes. And I'm like, yeah, probably because their default is to undersing, and they're 15. So what that means is I'm going to try to get them to explore what their voice is fully capable of, even if what that means is the adrenaline on stage hits and they overdo it. But in my experience, it's easier to get them to back off and refine things later if they've just ripped off the Band-Aid and got over the fear of making noise. And if I can get them to just get past that fear, then yeah, they might oversing the first few times as they're trying to figure out what that boundary is. But then once they've fallen in love with their whole body vibrating, then it's a whole lot easier to refine things later. Thoughts?
I think there's a weird fight between voice instructors and choral directors on the undergraduate, graduate level. And you would think that we would have these conversations, right? We're not just in the same vein, we're in the same profession. And
Yeah.
yet there is a lot of disagreement between, right? And so I've often found institutions where they're even the previous one that I worked at, like the students for the lab would come up for performance lab, and I'm like, I could barely hear what they're singing, and why the hell are they doing "The Water Is Wide," which is appropriate for 14, 15-year olds, and then you have a senior singing "The Water Is Wide," right? And so like there was that fear of like injuring your voice. But what's happened is psychologically students begin to doubt their sound. And you can see it at all different ages, right? During maturation in particular, I think, as a young boy, even before they're going through full puberty, they have to relearn how to reuse that instrument. And so oftentimes when they're under singing, they're just not using air. And if you don't use air to sing through your passaggio, then you're doing something wrong. And by the time we've made them accustomed to not wanting to use a full sound, and we begin to doubt that sound, you are absolutely right. There is a huge problem where choirs are under singing, and it stems from a lot of things that are happening in the undergraduate level because they're being told, like, you're going to hurt your voice. Well, guess what? Not singing is going to hurt their voice, and it's going to hurt their career. They will begin to doubt what they're capable of. And I've seen phenomenal singers, including some that I taught when they were in high school, get to college and they come back. And I'm like, what happened? What happened to that fearless singer that was going to take over the world? It was a voice teacher or a choir director said too much, and they began to overcompensate and they begin to have self-doubt. And it's a huge problem. It's a huge, huge problem.
I totally agree, and I've seen it from where I sit too. I've seen. I have a private voice student in high school once who had her whole college paid for by the work that we had done in high school and her voice training, and she was a voice major. And by the end of her lessons, she was not sing like her voice lessons. She would sing into my left ear as I played the piano, and my eardrums were throbbing like it sore by the end of her voice lessons, her 30-minute voice lessons, not because she was over singing, but because she had worked out her resonance to the point where it was legit adult resonance. And then a year later, she was barely able to make a noise because after going off to college and having a voice teacher that was just going to break everything down and rebuild it, which sometimes, to be fair, voice teachers do have to do that. But sometimes it happens because there's an ego of the voice teacher that says, I would like to build this voice. And then the kid, of course, doesn't know what to do.
You know what I love about Berkeley too, and again, it's a shout out to Berkeley, was that I never felt that way, right? I never, even though it's a well recognized school, I never felt that my ideas were too much, right? Like everyone wants to share these ideas. I feel like in a lot of small institutions, right? And I understand why in higher ed, oftentimes they might be a department of a few, and so they have to compensate by having being a loud voice and defend their position. But what's happened is I think some people take it the wrong way and they get overly protective with these voices and their studios, and it just causes so much self doubt. And so like your student that you talked about, that that's an atrocity. Like it really is, right? Someone who had the potential to do something really quite special had been told that they're doing it all wrong, or at least you need to work on your voice, right? Like just mentally, it just throws people off. I say the most important quality to being a good teacher is communication, right? You should know, I am freezing the student up. I need to stop right now and find a different way for them to learn something. But if you don't have the communication skills to see the nonverbal cues, it's a big thing. And let's be fair, right? Like the closest teachers that I were with was with my piano teacher and my voice instructor. It's such a powerful moment when you're one on one with a teacher for 50 to an hour long, and you have to establish that trust. But if you're trusting in someone who has that ego to try to tell you that you're doing it wrong, it's really it's really sad to see. But that's why I think, as to address that, right? Like Filipino choral music is a great way to be teaching how to use your voice, and when it's good to when it's have a more focused, refined sound versus a full bodied sound.
Yeah, if you need something where you want your singers to go balls to the wall, maybe we need to get them some Filipino stuff.
That's right. Yeah. And by the way, and I think the whole thing too, like the 24 Italian arias, I get it. We all had to learn it. We all sang three or four of them. But like there's some Filipino folk songs that are really quite special. I would want that, right? Like I would want to sit in on an audition and like, oh my gosh, a song that I haven't heard. A couple of people I want to also say too is composers that you should really look at is Ailey Matthew Magnano. He's really quite wonderful. I also think if you're working with young kids, Tiffany UC Berry, over in California, she's big in Orff World. She codified and wrote a lot of this music, folk songs for young elementary school singers to sing, and it's really quite wonderful. Her stuff is really quite great. There's also Sonder Choi. He's a Berkeley grad. He wasn't my student, but Saunders also really wonderful. A lot of his music has been performed internationally and in competition. And the one thing about Filipinos, I told you that we're really bad business people, right? We're just not great at doing that, but we're really good at trying to find a time and work with you. So if you want access to a repertoire, go on to Music C, go ahead and check it out. And then oftentimes, if you find a song that you like, the composer will like just send an email and say, I'd love for you to tell us how we're doing, or maybe talk through it, and they will absolutely do that. And the one thing I like about Music C2 is depending on the composer, they will also use like audio tracks. So like this is how you speak it. So I did Magnificat by Ali Matthew Magnano, and it was like ang pusko'y nagpupuri panggan, on, right? It was like a very fast, and the way he broke it down, and he had the IPA available, but I was like, ang puso ko'y nagpupuri, right? Like he broke it down and then he did it faster and faster and faster. So those are resources that you can use, and it's so helpful. So it's absolutely accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Now, Reagan, I want to take you in kind of a slight tangent, but related as we wrap this up. So and it's kind of a cultural question again about the Philippines, because it's also on my mind. And we talked about maybe talking about this towards the end. Is there a difference between what about men singing in the Philippines versus here, what you observe here in the United States? In other words, I know, for example, some Polynesian cultures, there are a lot of Samoan kids around the area that I live, where men singing is like not girly at all. It's not for girls. The men in Samoan culture sing, and it's a very manly thing to use your voice. And sing high pitches and call them across the room or the valley even or whatever. Whereas American kids, like, singing is for girls and it's cringe. So how would you describe that, how that operates in Filipino culture?
Everyone sings. Like, everyone sings. I remember going to my friend's house here in the States, and I'm like, where, like, for a party, I'm like, where's the karaoke machine? Like, where's the karaoke machine? Like, it's not a party if you don't bring out your karaoke machine. And you see that in a lot of Latino cultures too, right? You have these young kids young boys who are singing full out, full bodied. And, um, there's not as big of a social stigma around it. So let's just take, like, the lead singer of Journey, right? Like, the new lead singer of Journey is a Filipino man who
Yes, I saw that.
oh, his voice is out of this world, right? Those high
Mm-hmm.
pitches, like, they embrace that, right? Like, good singing is good singing. To say that there's no social stigma, I think would be not entirely accurate, but there's a bigger social stigma that's happening here that I've observed in the United States than there is in the Philippines. I do think it's culturally. I also think people don't know how to work with changing voices as well. And I
Mm-hmm.
also think that I think we can be far more efficient with how we recruit singers into our choir. So I always say this too, like, follow me too. I started one, the Choir Doctor. It's an Instagram account that I started doing it. And that's one of, like, my episodes, is like recruiting tenors and basses into your choir. But I do think that we need to be actively asking students to join choir. Like, why aren't you in choir? I do think that we need to have, if you can work it in your schedule, I think if you can put all the tenors and basses into one class, you can work with the unique challenges of maturation. I mean, you might have a boy that one day who sings as a high soprano, and then literally the next day their voices drop to an
Mm-hmm.
alto, and we have to be
Yeah.
able to write around that. I think teachers are lazy. Oh gosh, I'd be careful. Not all teachers, but I think a lot of choral directors tend to be a little bit lazy, right? Like, if there's a part that's too low for their singers, we're like, oh, just sing it an octave higher. I was like, girl, like, no, like, their range is so short, and to
Yeah.
ask them to
Right.
jump up an octave higher, there's
Or just
nothing.
leave out half the notes. Just leave
Yeah,
out the one. Yeah.
yes, yeah, and
Yeah.
to be fair, right? Like, I wasn't told that it's okay to change the score when I was an undergrad, right? I was a rule follower, and I treated everything like Mozart or Beethoven or Bach, where, like, they placed that note purposefully, but we need to be able to, like, modify the line for the singer in that moment. So we got to give tools to our teachers who can adapt with the changing voice. So I think choir directors, some of them tend to be lazy and just to say jump up an octave, when they could easily say, instead of jumping up an octave, here's another pathway so that you're still singing the chord, and actually give that to them. I also think it's a culture thing in the classroom. I was very blessed when I taught in high school. I worked with my junior high choir, and then I ended up started teaching in the high school choir. And I remember by the time the students who I had in junior high were in high school, and I was like, oh my God, like, I had more boys in choir than I had girls in a very large choir. And I realized that, like, in that moment, like, I had my finger on the pulse of what was happening in the culture of the school outside the music department. We stick to our music. We stick to our music suite all the time. But if you really want to change that culture so it's acceptable for a boy to sing in choir, you got to be outside. And I remember I would say to a student, like, I would make a big show. I was probably the only Filipino guy in, like, central Massachusetts, right? So I was even in my district, everyone recognized who I was. And I remember I'd walk into the football game, the big football game, and I would say hi, and I would do that. So people saw me outside, and I would, football player, I go, I went to your game. Come to the concert. Or I say, why aren't you in choir? Why didn't you do that? And then even if they say no, they are less likely to not discourage students from joining choir, because you are actively recruiting them. I think we only recruit a lot of our teachers are only recruiting from the music suite, and we've got to do a lot more to get them outside.
Yeah, no, I think that's all really exactly right. Now, I also think, and I want to know what you think about this too, but what my instinct is right now, even in the last 5 years, mostly because of the internet, there is a version of masculinity that boys are being presented with that does not show up in choir. In other words, the version of what they are being shown is what a man is supposed to be. is not reflected in most choir settings that they see. And so there is a disconnect, and they wouldn't articulate it this way. They wouldn't say, well, that doesn't look as masculine as the internet memes that I'm seeing online. But I think that is partly what's happening, and that's why I'm seeing colleagues all over the country saying, like, where are all the boys going? They're going even faster now than ever before. They're leaving. What do you think about that theory? That's part of it.
This is really hard for me to say, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think we need to be sounding the alarm bell. I think we have a real problem that's hitting in the choral music world right now. I'm seeing a mass exodus of not just teachers, but also tenors and basses into choirs, right? And I think you talked a lot. What's really wonderful about our profession is that we're really empathic and we're really a welcoming space for every single student. But a lot of young boys do not feel like it's a safe space. And they don't feel like it's a safe space because like they have to be vulnerable, right? Like it's more than just the voice change. It's more than like our inability. Like growing up, I remember I didn't really have a dramatic voice change, but I know a lot of my singers did, right? And they didn't want to make that mistake in front of people. So like there's a real issue about that. And there's nothing worse than being a short guy going through junior high. And it's the same thing as there's nothing worse than being a tall girl in junior high school. Those are really hard things. Like maturation hits boys and girls, and it hits races differently, right? So like Black and Hispanic, they hit maturation first, and then Asian and white hit maturation last, right? So you can begin to start preparing for that as a teacher, knowing who your students are in front of them. But yeah, I think there's a lot of conversations about what masculinity is and what's toxic masculinity, what's not. But like at the end of the day, we're really just like making music and trying to like focus on the humans that are in front of us, right? We're celebrating the humans that are in front of us. And I think by not addressing that, right? By not addressing that. And I will say too, like a lot of some teachers who want to recruit boys into their choir, I think they go to the extremities. Like I had one person say to me like, "Oh, I do a guys' night," and then they had like jerseys. They sang songs in like with wearing like jerseys, and I remember going like, I don't think I would have wanted to have been a part of that choir, right? Like I think they use the cliche of what a man should be by putting us in like sports jerseys to sing in choir, right? Like I think students want to be a part of a successful program that sounds good, right? So if we are creating or selecting music or rearranging music that they sound great in, that's going to be, I think, the first step in celebrating the boys in your choir, right? Like, I don't even think you even need to talk about like what's our perception of singing choir. If you are a group of young tenors and basses and you have a kick-ass sound, it's not going to matter. People are going to want to be a part of that. And there's nothing more. Like you can see, I used to do show choir. I often, I'll still sometimes I'll judge, but like when you have tenors and bass choir, like, and they're singing full out, and the sound might not be good, but the energy is there, and they sound decent. Like that brings the house down. Like they want to be a part of something that sounds good. So we've got to learn how to work with the voices, and I think that's going to bring a lot of. I think it's going to help correct course on the exodus of tenors and basses in our programs.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there is all those things that you said are true, provided that we can get them to actually give it a chance in the first place. And so that's why I do think there is I agree with you what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing, but I think that there's two separate buckets that we have to think about this in. One is the product we're putting out there, like you said, if it's kick-ass, the kids will want to join. But then there's also the messaging, the how do we cut through through this saturated social media filter that a lot of the boys that will never walk by the music area of the high school or whatever, they're not even gonna know what we're doing. They're just gonna get the perception from what other kids are saying. And so that's where I do think the masculinity conversation comes in. I think a lot of people will say, I want more boys in my choir, but if they hear someone say, how do I make my choir more friendly to the masculine, then of course there would be shrieking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you would be doing a disservice, right? Like, I would not walk into, or if someone asked me to do a clinic with their students, one of the first things I ask is, how do they do academically? It's a weird question to ask, but if I ask how do they do academically, I'm like, oh, they're high achievers, or generally they're the highest achieving group. I provide my directives to them differently, right? I could say you need to add a crescendo here. Right now it's too loud. Versus like if they're like, if they're like, oh yeah, it's open to everyone, right? So like if the GPAs go across the board, I might use more visuals in order to say like, okay, here's a number line. 1 is pianissimo, 10 is fortissimo, and I have them use that visual. There's different ways, right, as a teaching strategy. I would not be doing my job if I would approach everyone in this homogenous group of people, right? Everyone, there's so much identity with each particular student. And I think that if a teacher is going to teach the same way to every single student without modifying, adapting who they are, recognizing the different personalities in a classroom, I think that they're going to really fail to connect with the students. Back to that communication component, right? Like even when my daughter, my daughter, she's 6 years old. She has, with her friends, I talk to them differently than I do with my 10-year-old son. And it's intentional because like they respond differently to each other. So yeah, I do think that that's a scary part for people to begin addressing. And like I said earlier, I think I think people have been more. I think our profession has been doing some really wonderful work with trying to be more inclusive. But the sad part is boys are feeling more and more and more isolated from what we're doing. And we've got to reverse that, and we've got to reverse that in how we talk to them, how we address the issue, and then just make beautiful music, make them have a sound that they are absolutely proud of. It's small changes that could make a huge impact in a school district.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Reagan, thank you so much for spending time with me. This has been really fun, and learning a little bit more about Filipino culture and just hearing your thoughts on a lot of music ed things. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.